For their help in making the following conversation possible, we'd like to thank Greenwich Library, the India Cultural Center of Greenwich, and Archana Makam. Hello, and welcome to Date with an Author, Greenwich Library's virtual author series. I'm Christine Kim. Today, we're very fortunate to have Lady Mohini Kent Noon, and she's going to talk to us about her book, Nagarjuna, the Second Buddha. Among other things, we're going to ask her why he's called the second Buddha. But first, a little background on Lady Noon. She was born and educated in India. She moved to London when she was 21. Her life has been a blend of East and West, and this is reflected in her work and her writing. She's written for India Today, Times of India, The Week, The Tablet, and BBC Radio. She's written a novel, Black Taj. She co-wrote a play, Rumi, Unveil the Sun. She has written and directed several films, notably Ramayana, a dance drama, and Curry Tiffin, which is about the history of India as told through food. She also founded and leads an anti-human trafficking nonprofit, Lily Against Human Trafficking. I could go on and on about the many other things she does, but then we would never get to the book we want to talk about. So I will simply wrap up by saying that she is the global envoy in the United Kingdom for the International Buddhist Confederation, and that she splits her time between London and Delhi. Welcome, Lady Noon, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Christine. Please call me Mohini, and it's a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.
We're happy to have you. So in fact, you are in Delhi right now, aren't you?
That's right, I'm in Delhi.
Good morning to you then.
It's just wonderful how now space doesn't seem to matter in our virtual world.
It's amazing. Let's get right into it. Who was Nagarjuna, and why is he called the second Buddha?
You know, when I started research for this book, I actually wanted to string it along the sort of incidents of his life. But I found there was very little actual evidence about his life. But there's a huge body of work that he's left behind, which tells us a lot about his capacity, his attainment. But he was, what I gather, is the master of Nalanda University in around the 2nd century AD. And Nalanda was the greatest center of Buddhist learning at that time. And he had huge attainments because there are all sorts of mythologies around him, like of great figures. He could, you know, his death, some say he lived for 100 years, some say he lived for 200 years, some say he lived for 600 years. And then he had, you know, he would die when he willed it. And he, you know, knew, I mean, he had the knowledge of alchemy, and which, of course, being a great master and one of spiritual attainment, he never misused. But in times of famine and all, he could, you know, feed all the monks and people around Nalanda. He had discovered the secret of the philosopher's stone, and he could transform iron into gold. And but his mental and his spiritual attainment was such that, you know, he's brought into the forefront. These were all teachings of the Buddha, which had fallen into, you know, a little bit of obscurity, and he revived them. And in the Mahayana tradition, which is really the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the Tibetans are really custodians of the Nalanda tradition. He's known as the second Buddha.
Okay, and I am looking to share the image of the Dalai Lama that we have here. One moment.
So I must tell you that many people refer to the Dalai Lama as a living Buddha. He has led an impeccable life. And when the Chinese invasion of Tibet forced him into exile, he's lived in India since about 1959. And I think it's the, you know, the good fortune of the world that he has been available, he has traveled, he has given teachings, and his teachings are always of being kind and being compassionate. And he is the Tibetans, and His Holiness has given the foreword to my book, in which he emphasizes that, he follows and the teachings of Nagarjuna, which are highly logical and very eminently suitable for our world. So he was kind enough to also release the book, as you see the image. And, he's very, what should I say, spontaneous. And he, held it in front of his heart, and he held it on his head, and he said, this is real philosophy, because he has the highest regard for Nagarjuna. And His Holiness has great interest in scientific knowledge as well. And the thing about the logical nature of the Nalanda masters and the teachings are that it's now coming together with quantum physics, because we, in Buddhism, you sort of don't accept, there are two truths. There is the ultimate truth, and there's the perceived truth. And science is now saying that the observer is as important as the observed object, because at the end of the day, we observe and we analyze and we see, is this good for me, is this bad for me? So we are actually creating a subjective reality all the time. So it's all now coming together. And I think, again, it's got a lot to do with the mind, because His Holiness is always talking about the unruly mind, which actually creates a lot of destructive emotions for us, which harasses us. And I think this is particularly important in the time of this pandemic, because, the two central teachings of Nagarjuna, they're not his teaching, they're the Buddha's teachings, but he's, explained them, he's written at great length on these, are emptiness and interdependence. And if we look at interdependence, human beings, we think we are independent and we are not connected and we are not dependent on nature. We try and control nature. We try and, exercise our power on nature. And I think it's been shown to us now in this pandemic that nature is much more powerful than man and human beings. And money, which had become, wealth had become the overwhelming, power in the world. And yet this pandemic has taught us that, even billionaires are gasping for breath, and the air is free. So, at the end of the day, we have not been mindful about how we've lived. We have not been respectful of nature and the environment and the other species, because nature has actually spent millions of years in shaping these other species, whoever they are, elephants or crocodiles or whatever. But we have overpowered them all. Some have been driven to extinction. The others are reduced to living on reservoirs, basically reservations and parks and game parks. And so, I think we have to revise how we interact with the world and how, we live mindfully. One of the things, the sayings about saying is that Buddhism is the thread between the ultimate truth and the glass of water that you're drinking. And to live in the... Sorry?
How is that it is the link between the glass of water and the ultimate truth?
Because, the whole thing about the Buddha and his teachings was about living in the present and living mindfully. So when you're drinking that glass of water, hold that glass in your hand, get the feel of the glass, feel the water in your mouth, feel the water going down your throat, concentrate on that moment. And in a way, by concentrating on that moment, you're transcending your sort of own limitations, because we don't actually live in the present. We are either full of regret and wounded by the past, and most people are wounded by the past, or we are anxious about the future. So we are not, and that's what His Holiness, when he says recognize the precious nature of each day. If one can live that one perfect day, that is mindful living. And it's also, controlling the mind, because this, again, Nalanda teachings and Nagarjuna's teachings, it's about the mind. And it's the destructive emotions like anger, jealousy, greed, hatred, which don't give us peace of mind. And peace of mind really is happiness, because we live in this kind of framework of saying, I need this and I need that and I need that and I need that. But actually, that is never a way to be satisfied. And the Buddha actually said there are two things. One is that, when you satisfy your desire, it leaves a sort of bitter taste in your mouth because it's satisfied and it's gone. You're not sort of permanently satisfied, because then there's the next desire. And he also said, emotions keep a human being on the boil. So it's our own self and our own, undisciplined mind that one needs to look at, which is really what teachings of the Buddha and Nagarjuna are about. And His Holiness said, it's time to educate the heart. So he's actually working with scientists and to create a map of emotions, which will be available, because our emotions are much stronger than even our thoughts and resolutions. You may go forward to meet someone, say, I'm not going to get angry, no matter what the person says, and then you get provoked, because that emotion is stronger than, your thought that, I'll behave in such a way or I'll behave in such a way. So, again, His Holiness, who's really brought Buddhism again to the world and shared these very invaluable teachings, and especially the Nalanda teachings and Nagarjuna and the 18 Nalanda masters. And, he's always telling people to find a meaningful life, because we are looking for meaning and happiness in things that are themselves transient and temporary. And whether they are human beings or family, everyone's subject to death. And success or career or wealth or everything, it's never the same all the time. It keeps changing. So to base our happiness, that's what the Buddha felt, and that's why he went from home to homelessness, because he was a prince. He was an Indian prince, and he would have been a very great, emperor if he had kept on that path. But he felt that these were just sort of, temporary trinkets. And there was not ultimate satisfaction, because everyone is subject to suffering, sorrow, old age, sickness, death. So he found a way of the ending of sorrow, which is really to our own evolution and our own minds. The first place is the mind, which can lead you astray, which can torment you.
Let me ask you something. Let's take a step back. In a earlier conversation that you and I had, you had said that you've said you're not a practicing Buddhist and not a Buddhist scholar, but obviously you know quite a bit and you do practice many of the things you've just talked about. But you said, yes, I'm a Buddhist then, but I'm also a Hindu and I'm a Sikh. And in the book, you also talk about, I think you mentioned, that the teachings of Nagarjuna and Buddhism in general can be used and applied by anyone, even someone who practices already another religion or practices no religion. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, because, if you look now, Buddhism is a world religion. It has not become a world religion by conquest or by conversion. It has become a world religion through monks who travel and travelers. And it has because it's about the human being, and people are who have become Buddhists. There is something about that they have liked, which has given them the freedom, which is, there's no kind, it's liberated. It's a liberating message. And it has changed everywhere it's gone. When Buddhism went to Tibet, it changed Tibet. But Tibet also changed Buddhism. And there isn't one fixed text. There are different canons, you know, in different parts of the world. And the Buddha, he didn't encourage questions like, you know, what is the beginning of the world and what's the end of the world, and what are the cosmologies, and where are the miracles, and where is this whole body of, you know, mythology and miracles and all, which world faiths have. He said that rather than, he said there's a very famous example. He says, rather than looking at all that, because that's like being hit by an arrow, by being wounded by an arrow and refusing treatment until you know what wood is an arrow made of, where it's come from, who has shot it. The important thing is that you address the wound. And it's about the human being. And you know, the tradition of Indian psychology is thousands of years old. I mean, that's what Vedanta is about. It's about the human being. It's about human psychology. There's no divinity in it. And the Buddha was a psychologist par excellence. I mean, this is now, we are, you know, going back 2,500 years. And he taught according to whom he was addressing. So it's called skillful teaching. He could have been talking to a genius, in which case his message would be appropriate for the genius, or he could be talking to a 5-year-old child. Then he would explain it. So in those terms, because when the Buddha was enlightened, this is a very nice phrase that I particularly like. He didn't want to return to the world because he was the awakened one. He was the enlightened one. And he didn't want to return to the world. And that's when the powers and, you know, came and asked him to return to the world and teach. Because they said there are some who are clear-sighted and they don't need you. And there are some who have so much dust in their eyes that they are not going to heed you, you know, pay no attention to you. But there are those with little dust in their eyes who will listen to you, hear your message, and they will find the path. And so he came back to teach. And there are a lot of parables in Buddhist teachings, which is you know, we all love stories. So you hear the story and you understand the message. So I was born into a Sikh family. Now Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism, they've come out of the Vedantic fold. And what is Vedanta? It's about the human being. You know, the spiritual research was into one's, how to transform oneself. And life is a journey of transformation. And if one is just caught up entirely in material existence, the feeling is you miss the opportunity, because death is inevitable. And death is going to part you from every single thing on earth. You know, it's your house, your cup of tea, your slippers, your bank account, it will happen. But meanwhile, there is an evolutionary process going on in nature. You know, it's again our ego that we think, you know, man is the last word of nature, because the evolutionary process has not stopped and it doesn't stop. So it is, as individuals, because we have a thinking mind, if you study, you get all these concepts and you practice, you can actually participate in your own evolution and evolve. And that is why the Buddha went from samsara, which is the world, to nirvana, which is, you know, the state of enlightenment. And we can all do it because, you know, there is this opportunity given to us and this possibility. And I mean, I have studied quite a lot of Vedanta. And if you read the Upanishads, for example, or the Bhagavad Gita, it's all about self-transformation. There is no divinity out there who's there to judge you or punish you. That's a little infantile as far as, you know, Vedanta is concerned, because it's a human being and there is only one consciousness that pervades the whole universe, whether it's the tree or it's me or it's the water. And that's really what quantum physics is now telling us also, is that one substance, there aren't separate building blocks in nature. There are only, it's a web of interlinked things, and it's the same sort of substance. So it's that one consciousness, and that is what Vedanta is about. And this is now going back about 7,000 years. And, you know, the Buddha would have been enculturated in this because he was an Indian prince. But then, you know, he focused on the suffering and a way out of the suffering. So, of course, when I say I'm not a Buddhist scholar, I'm not an academic scholar. I have been studying and reading Buddhism and Vedanta since my teenage years. And I practice because mindfulness, I mean, these are things, again, especially this is very relevant in this time of pandemic. Buddhism actually belongs out on the streets. It's not just for monasteries. You don't have to give up anything. You have to practice it as part of your daily life. As I said, it's this one glass of water that you are drinking. You feel the glass, you feel the water, you taste it in your mouth. When you walk in the park, you walk mindfully. When you're taking a train journey, a tube journey, in London we call them tubes. I don't know in New York whether you call them tubes, but you know, you're sitting on the tube there, and or you're hanging on to one of those, you know, straps, and you can use that few minutes just to concentrate on your breathing. And you walk mindfully instead of your mind sort of, you know, you're in a park. I mean, I have Regent's Park near me in London. Instead of, you know, if I'm in Regent's Park, I should be wholly in Regent's Park. I shouldn't be then in, you know, Delhi or New York or something. So this is, you know, being fully present in the moment. And that is a practice that you're not limited to a chair or, you know, your place of meditation. And so I think this is to find a meaningful life. And this is how we can actually focus on the moment, and that frees you from stress. So this is a great kind of, you know, string to hang on to free oneself from stress, which I think is particularly relevant now. And I mean, now we are talking, you and I, so, you know, that's the only thing that exists. That's the only reality. This is where we are right now. You know, this morning what I had for breakfast is gone. What I'll have for lunch later is non-existent yet. But this is the only reality right now.
Well, what you're talking about certainly is becoming more known throughout the world, as you say. People who have not studied Buddhism at all have learned how to practice mindfulness, and that's certainly become very popular here in the United States, and I would imagine in other places as well. So there is quite a bit of relevance from these Buddhist teachings and from Nagarjuna, a 2nd century guy, to our lives today. As you've pointed out, you've talked about how it would inform our relationship with nature, or what our relationship with nature should be, what our relationship to the material world should be. Probably we are more attached to it than we ought to be. But there's also one other thing that you've mentioned to me that Nagarjuna's ethics would inform for our current modern daily lives, and that's the area of philanthropy. What would, I think that it affected, think that's your philanthropy was informed by some of perhaps the ethics of Nagarjuna. Would you care to talk about that at all?
Yes, happy to, because, you know, I've also been a student of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in so much as these days we live in an age where people are highly educated. And so much information is available. If you want to follow a particular master, there are, teachings on YouTube. There are books available. I mean, 2000 years ago, none of this was possible. You had to actually physically go and seek someone, even 150 years ago or 100 years ago. That's no longer the case. And the Dalai Lama, who, as I said, is, the Tibetans are the custodians of the Nalanda culture, and Nagarjuna. Every single teaching of his, he emphasizes compassion. If you look at this teaching of interdependence, if we are interdependent, then the other is also me. How can you not be kind? Because you're not an isolated entity. So kindness and compassion. And the Dalai Lama always says, if you want to be happy, be compassionate. If you want to make others happy, be compassionate. Because eventually there is some goodness in us, which feels, it's a feel-good factor to to help somebody who's hungry, give them food. We have just been going through an extreme hunger crisis. And this Lily Against Human Trafficking, the human trafficking charity, we did some fundraising for emergency food. And I'm so important, and I have this and I have that. And, the urchin on the street who is half naked on a cold night has nothing to do with me. But actually, he has everything to do with me, because we are part of the same human energy. And the highest common denominator can go no higher until the lowest common denominator is pulled up. And it is our interdependence that we need to recognize, and compassion. Because at the end of the day, one is being actually kind to oneself, because there is a feel-good factor about it. And human trafficking in particular, I've just written a book which is for the charity, and one of the letters from eminent personalities to their own mothers, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Sir Cliff Richard, the Indian Prime Minister Modi. But one of the letters says that what can be a bigger blot on the face of humanity than a trade in human beings? And this is a trade that is valued at about, estimated at about $100 billion annually. And it's an international problem. It's, in my understanding, it's overtaken drugs. So it's the number 2 after guns. Now, there are more slaves in the world today than at the time of the Roman Empire. Of course, the population is much greater. But, we see these old Hollywood films, or they're not making them anymore, but they used to make these films about the Roman Empire and the slaves and all that. But there are more slaves in the world today. And there are children in brothels. And in the UK and in America, there were new anti-slavery laws passed in 2015. Now, why do we need a modern slavery act today? Because the problem is much worse than it used to be. And in Britain, when the first anti-slavery bill was passed, and I don't know the exact dates, but say 200 years ago or maybe a little more, William Wilberforce, who pushed it through Parliament, he said, you may choose to do nothing, but you can never again say you did not know. So if you know that this is happening, if you know that children and women largely, men also, but in the sex trade, it's mainly women and girls, are being bought and sold, are being kidnapped, are being, traded. They are enduring lives of great cruelty. And we are named after a 4-year-old girl who was sold for about 50 pounds. And, she was in a brothel, and there are adult males who are raping these children. And we still choose to do nothing. Then I think we are letting ourselves down. And if, where is the compassion? Where is the interdependence? Which is something that we need to recognize and live more ethically. And Nagarjuna, and ethics and morals are very important in Buddhism because it is the law of karma. What is the law of karma? It's nothing baffling. It is what you do today will be reflected in your life. How you act, how you conduct yourself, with what motivation you do it, this creates your future. So, His Holiness, in fact, talked about true friendship, which is based on trust. If one lies and cheats and, exploits people, there is short-term gain. But actually, you've done yourself a lot of damage and harm for very temporary gain. So, human trafficking, where you can imagine how terrifying it is to actually be kidnapped and removed to an environment. You have no value in that environment except as a commodity. I mean, these bodies are used like ATM machines, to yield money for the owners. And there's no healthcare, no proper food, nobody even smiling at you, there's no friendship, it's hell. And it's happening on a very large scale now. So the Lily charity, what we also support educational projects because we would rather prevent this from happening than have children and all go through the trauma. But of course, if they have, then there are shelter homes and there is, education later. But I think, our lives are finite. They're bound by time. So what use you make of this one day, what you do for others, because this service to others is really service to oneself, because it makes you more human and makes you, kinder, and your consciousness evolves and the soul. Because I think, whether I think everybody has good and bad in them. So to nurture the good, to bring out the better qualities of the mind, to consciously work to invent yourself or reinvent yourself, that is open to us. And that really is Nagarjuna's message.
And a very wonderful message. And thank you for talking about these things. And certainly, as you point out, at a time when there's a global pandemic and when we can all use a little bit less stress and a little bit more talk of compassion and hope. Really appreciate it. I'm going to go off script just for a little bit here. And I don't even know if they'll include this in the conversation, but my interest is piqued. My personal question, I have a question myself. What you were saying about karma, it makes a lot of sense to me. And then the next obvious question is, but what about a 4-year-old girl like Lily? What did she do? Surely she did not do anything to deserve the hellish life that she must have led. How is that explained by karma, something like that? Or any slave for that matter?
Well, the Buddha, he said that he was enlightened many eons ago. Our life is just a little portion in our very long existence of evolution. And as an individual, I have to be conscious of how I'm living today, because I am in no position to tell you or even try and judge. First of all, I'm not here to judge anybody else. I'm not here to evaluate anybody else. I'm not here to exploit. I'm not here to evade taxes, which is another thing I've never understood. I'm not here to harm. So I'm only here to improve myself. So the Buddha said that, he's known as a Tathagat, the one who came and the one who went, which means he never came and he never went anywhere. It's just that he was manifest for a while, and we saw the manifestation and we have got the message of that manifestation. Coming back to this 4-year-old girl, what happened, why it happened, in fact, that's what the Buddha also said, that, instead of worrying and wondering about that, even about ourselves. Look at today. Today, what can I do to help that 4-year-old? Am I going to ignore her? Am I going to carry on living my sort of cocoon life because I'm more privileged than her, I'm more educated than her, I'm in better circumstances than her, and fate placed me in some other circumstances? Or am I going to recognize the commonality with her as a human being and do something? So that is what is given to us. So, this speculation, you would have noticed yourself that in the past 30 years or so, there's a lot of interest in past life regressions, especially in America, more than Britain. Now, this is something the rishis have, knowledge they gave us about 7,000 years ago. So we grow up with this kind of, acceptance. Now, but the whole point to me about past lives is just healing yourself. Because what I do today is also going to be imprinted in my consciousness. And there's a good saying that came on WhatsApp. It said, karma never forgets an address. So in Buddhism, it's a non-theistic faith. And the responsibility is with you. What are you doing today to improve yourself, to improve your own chit, so to speak? So we have to worry about our own karma. And karma is the law of action and reaction. You get a reaction back for the action, which I think is something very simple and easy to understand. Because when you meet an angry person, it sometimes provokes the anger in you.
Sure.
But the anger is in you to be provoked. A saint may not have that anger in that. So then the angry person who goes to the saint actually stops feeling angry because there's no response. But we have to look within and cleanse ourselves. We are not here to judge and change anybody else. But if one person can change, the Dalai Lama said something quite interesting, because I had a Zoom call yesterday about my charity, and someone said, but what can I do? And I said that one person can make all the difference. And His Holiness said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. And this tiny little mosquito can really ruin your sleep, and surely you and I have more power than a mosquito to do something. So that is really what I think. Mind your own karma and be connected with the world. We are part of the human race. There are people who cannot help themselves. A 4-year-old uneducated girl in a brothel is not in a position to help herself, but we can. So our project, she's now about 24, and our project actually rescued her quite soon. Then she was in a sheltered home, and she grew up. She passed out from school. She's a graduate. She learned singing. So that is our karma. We are not here to judge or explain why she was in that position. And when she was about 18, and by the way, I must tell you that we changed the names of everyone. This is by a legal requirement. We can't show their faces. We can't give their real names. And when she was about 18, I actually inquired from the project leader. And I said, look, what does she want to do now? Because she's finished school, and everyone has some dream, some ambition, and some talent they want to follow. What does she want to do? Now, this is the whole thing about, imprints also in our consciousness. And our subconscious mind, is much, much bigger than our conscious mind. By the way, my first degree was in psychology. And really, I found it quite limited. It limits us in lots of ways, because it puts us into, it pigeonholes so many experiences and ages and all that. Whereas the Buddha was really, for example, was a amazing psychologist, and he taught skillfully. That's the name. And so the thing is that the traumas that these victims, even when they're rescued, they stay with them. They're not encouraged to talk about them. But, she just wept and wept and wept. And she said, I want to teach mothers to love their children, because actually it was her mother who sold her.
Oh.
She was a prostitute and she had a drinks and drug habit. And in the course of this work, I found that they all have drink and drug habit because it's such a dire life. They can't tolerate their lives otherwise. And this is happening under our very nose. So, if I'm part of the whole, then this is part of me also. And you and everybody else. We are all part of one whole. So I think this is also the interdependence of, Buddhism and Nagarjuna's teachings in particular. That everything comes from everything else. Your bodies come from your parents, really. Mind bodies come from there. Our minds have come from, you're born with a certain brain, but then it's your education, it's the gender, it's the, so many things define us, which are really not inside us. These are all external things that define us, that we accept, and this is the I. But actually, if you go inside, you find the consciousness, and the mind is unlimited, but we have limited it by thinking, I'm this, I'm that, I can do this, I can do that, I can do, whatever. So the Buddha he taught us not to believe in appearances, but to search for the reality and look inside. So, it's our minds, and then ethical, environmental protection. It's a very strong part of the Dalai Lama's teachings also. And they preserve the rivers, you honor the rivers, you honor the earth, everything is sacred. The earth is sacred, but, we think we are masters of everything.
Yes.
So I think maybe the pandemic might, teach us to look at humanity as a whole instead of this aggrandizement of certain nations and certain tribes and certain, identities. So I think this is really the message. And emptiness, what is emptiness? Emptiness is this, that there is, if I was had such fixed ingredients in me, or, identity in me, then I couldn't be transformed. So it is because there are many, many influences, and there is nothing that is completely fixed. If you look at our thoughts, they're also secondhand thoughts. Where have our thoughts come from? It's come from school, from parents, from society, from advertising, from books. These are all secondhand thoughts. I mean, really, who has original thoughts? And then, it's the news and it's whatever. And it shapes. So if you look at, the identity and sort of go back and peel back layer by layer by layer, it might get in touch with one's own reality, which is quite vast.
Well, for everything we've been talking about and more, the book is Nagarjuna, the Second Buddha. If you'd like to read the book, you can borrow it from the library, find it online, or call our friends at Diane's Books here in Greenwich, Connecticut to order it for you. Lady Noon, Mohini, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed that. Thank you.